what you're doing, because the future of the Central Asian countries should be bright. And I know the American perspective, we want them to be mutually beneficial in terms of economic and political success. With that, I now return. We go back to California again. Can you believe it? Congressman Brad Sherman.
Thank you, and I want to thank you, Assistant Secretary Liu, for spending an hour in my office. I asked many questions then, but believe it or not, I've got more now. I want to first start on Afghanistan. Former President Trump has said that there was an 18-month period in his administration when none of our servicemen were killed in Afghanistan. Is that true?
I have to refer you to the Department of Defense, sir.
I would point out that here's the chart of those who died. We lost 14 in 2017, 15 in 2018, 23 in 2019, and 11 in 2020. 63 of our servicemen killed in action during the Trump administration, during which we achieved absolutely nothing. Had we left on the first day of the Trump administration, Afghanistan would not be any worse than it is now. We in this committee, the Biden administration has been criticized for not going around Afghanistan and collecting the weapons. $11.5 billion of those weapons were sent there under the Trump administration. That's 15 times more weapons than Biden sent. These weapons are the most valuable thing that anybody in an Afghan village owns. If we were to have deployed 2,000 or 3,000 troops to roam all over Afghanistan, demanding that these armed people give us back the weapons, would we have incurred casualties, or would they have just said, "Oh, yeah, these are yours"? Could we have forcibly taken these weapons back? Could we have forced people to give us these back without any casualties? Could not. Thank you. I want to focus on Pakistan. First, they banned the bat symbol of the PTI. Then they banned the Batsman cricketer Imran Khan. Now they're looking to ban the Batsman's party. The information minister and two other ministers have said that they want to ban the PTI. Those same ministers have said they're looking to cancel the ID cards and passports of overseas Pakistanis just because they criticize the government. So that's an attack on the First Amendment rights of American citizens, dual citizens, and green card holders. We see in the latest development that the PTI office has been sealed and their National Information Secretary and many women have been arrested. We have an opportunity to demonstrate we're dedicated to democracy and human rights, because the PTI is not as pro-American as other parties in Afghanistan. If we look at individual issues that you deal with, they are not as helpful. But they are the largest party in Pakistan. Their leader is in prison, may face death. The best thing you can do is ask Ambassador Bloom to go visit Imran Khan in prison, and I wonder if you'd consider that.
I will definitely discuss it with Ambassador Bloom.
Thank you. I'd like to now focus on Sindh, to commend, and you should expand your communication in the Sindhi language, the language of southern Pakistan. We see, I just want to mention Priya Kumari, Hindu girl who's been missing after being kidnapped and perhaps forced to convert and marry an older man. We see political activist Hind Yata Lohar, well, at least I can pronounce the second name, Lohar, subject to political murder, and journalist Nasrullah Ghanani also killed, gunned down. And I would hope that you would direct our office to focus on these abuses of human rights. Finally, we've got H-1B visa holders that are required to go back to their home countries, which disrupts their whole lives just to renew their American paperwork. Also disrupts the companies they work for. You've got a pilot program to say, hey, maybe they can renew these right in your Westwood office, located in America's best state. How's that pilot program going?
Sir, very successfully. Tens of thousands of Indians
What do you need so that you can make this not a pilot program?
We are
but standard?
already prepared to roll this out as a full-scale program. We hope later this year.
And you could substantially shorten wait times for visas in India if the government of India would allow you to put 15 more consular officers in India. Is that correct?
That's correct, sir.
And we've got these 15 positions ready to go. And if the Indian government would simply allow them to be there, we wouldn't see, and this would reduce wait times for both immigrant visas and tourist visas.
Yes, sir.
It's about time the Indian government did that. I yield back.
Thank you very much, Congressman Sherman. We now proceed to Dr. Rich McCormick, Congressman from Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I will just start by addressing what I just heard from the other side of the aisle about the casualties in Afghanistan. I find it funny that they would grandstand off the 15 or 11 or however many fatalities per year. I happened to be in Afghanistan in 2017 as a head of emergency medicine in Kandahar. During 2017, thankfully, we had very few casualties compared to the hundreds we had during Obama. And I was also not there during the withdrawal, which we saw pretty much more people die that one day than you had the entire year of 2017. I just make the case that it was the worst withdrawal ever in military history for the United States. I stand by that. It was a crushing blow to the morale of our troops,
yield?
including, I will not. I think I've earned this. The men and women who served over in Afghanistan experienced something that will scar them for life because of that horrible withdrawal. With that said, I want to address a few things that I think you guys would be able to address better than most. President Biden's, speaking of Afghanistan, his withdrawal from Afghanistan left significant gaps in our counterterrorism efforts in Central Asia. In recent months, many officials have begun to raise alarms about rising threats posed by ISIS-K. Mr. Liu, what is the administration's plan to counter ISIS-K threat, particularly in Central Asia?
Congressman, first let me thank you for your service in Afghanistan and all of those men and women who served with you. Second, as someone, myself and my family who've spent a considerable number of years in Central Asia and in Pakistan, these are places right now that feel sincerely the threat being posed by this terrorist group, ISIS Khorasan province. We are working very determinedly, state, working with CIA, working with CENTCOM to make sure that we uphold President Biden's commitment that we will not allow groups based out of Afghanistan, terrorist groups, to threaten our partners and allies throughout this region. We see that today. There are very determined efforts to combat it. Sir, if you allow me, I'd be happy in closed session to provide you details of what we're doing.
I would like that. And how are we engaging with Central Asian countries such as Tajikistan to counter the ISIS-K as far as the coordination between countries? I know a lot of these countries are very poor. They reach out to us on occasion to keep us kind of, so we're not isolated away from China and their influences.
Well, sir, we have really very robust counterterrorism cooperation between the U.S. military, Tajikistan, and our intelligence services as well to help them understand the threat that they're facing. One of the most important things that we can do specific to Tajikistan is help them to make sure they're providing services to the poorest of their communities. Terrorism grows in part from radicalism, and that festers in places where people are so poor they can't feed their families. And that's where I know Ms. Cower and her team are working night and day to make sure that we are providing the money that you give us through the Congress to make sure it gets into the...
On a related note, I think that's an important thing. This is an investment. It's an investment to keep people from going over to where other people are also making investments, whether it be China or Russia or Iran, other countries who have nefarious purposes. Between the active conflicts in Ukraine and Israel and anti-American forces at home who advocate for our withdrawal from the rest of the world, in other words, isolationists, today's day and age finds U.S. global leadership constantly challenged. And I would say if we don't have leadership, if we don't have global leadership, we will have globalism. This is something to counter that. We must remain robust partnerships and alliances with nations that share our interests and values in critical regions like South and Central Asia. Amongst those partners are also Pakistan. That's why I introduced HRES 901, affirming U.S. support for democracy in that country, an investment in the future of that country to be more like us and less like them, if you will. The House passed this resolution on June 25th, thanks to my colleagues and Representative Dan Kildee, and thank you for their support. I commend your Bureau's findings request to strengthen democracies and institutions in Pakistan and promote that rule of law and encourage the private sector to continue to grow. However, China has vastly outspent us throughout the entire region, especially in Pakistan since 2012. And they're making solid progress in the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor known as CPEC. This gives China significant leverage over Pakistan. I'm really worried about the future as we invest. How do we leverage our position with Pakistan, our historic relationship, given also our relationship with India, and that's developing very quickly? How do we balance that and keep that in our advantage?
In the 2 seconds I have, I'll say China is the past in terms of investments in Pakistan. We are the future.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. McCormick. We now proceed to Congressman Kathy Manning of North Carolina.
Thank you to my friends, Chairs Joe Wilson and Young Kim, and Ranking Members Dean Phillips and Ami Bera for organizing this hearing, and thank you to our witnesses for your service to our country. Assistant Secretary Liu, last month, the government of Maldives, which your Bureau handles, announced that the country would ban Israeli passport holders from entering the country due to the war in Gaza. And later that month, Secretary Blinken welcomed the Maldives foreign minister and highlighted an upcoming $2 million in planned assistance to the Maldives. Can you tell us what the State Department has done to reverse the ban, and whether you believe that U.S. taxpayer assistance should go to a luxury tourist destination that bans Jewish Israelis from entering the country?
Thank you. I'm so glad that you asked this question. There's been a lot of misinformation in the media about what's happening in the Maldives with respect to any restrictions on Israeli citizens. You are correct in saying we have intensely engaged the government of the Maldives over this past month at the level of the Secretary of State, and then I recently, with the Deputy Secretary of State, met with the Minister of Economy, and then our ambassador met with the President of the Maldives. There is no ban. They have said that loud and clear to us. What you see in the media is not accurate. You have members of the opposition in the Maldives saying there should be a ban, but they have never introduced that in their parliament.
Okay, if you could provide my office with something in writing to back that up, I would greatly appreciate it, and we'd be happy to get it out to the press.
Absolutely, ma'am.
Let me ask you about another issue. Last week, the State Department unveiled the Global Guidelines for Countering Anti-Semitism, a major commitment made by more than 30 countries and international organizations to act against rising anti-Semitism and implement best practices to protect the Jewish communities around the globe. As head of the Bureau of South and Central Asia, will you commit to making sure that the chiefs of mission in your region are aware of and actively engage in advancing these guidelines to our partner countries?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Now we'll move to Afghanistan. The Taliban's rule, as you mentioned, has been devastating for women and girls in Afghanistan. They have imposed more than 100 draconian decrees on Afghan women, forcibly treating them like property, limiting their ability to work, to get an education, or to move freely in public without their husbands or male relatives. It's been devastating for the women in Afghanistan, women we talked with by Zoom before our exit from Afghanistan. Civil society and media organizations have crumbled without anyone openly speaking in opposition to the Taliban's rules, without facing threats and violence. So what meaningful opportunities remain for Afghan women, and how is the State Department working to reverse the Taliban's restrictions on nearly every aspect of their lives?
Representative Manning, we share the view that the edicts of the Taliban concerning women and girls are abhorrent, and we are working every day to provide the women and girls resources to make sure they have access to education at home if they're not allowed to have access in schools, but also now to think about how do we help the Taliban to reverse these decisions. We have tried for 3 years and made very little headway bilaterally. What we're now doing through something called the Doha process is having the United Nations take the lead to represent 190 countries to try to convince the Taliban that the path towards their normalization in the world, that they can have some sense of normal interactions, that goes through providing human rights, the right to education, rights for minorities to members of their community. And we see some small rays of hope that the Taliban are understanding that this is the path to their normalization.
I hope you will continue to push on that, because what's happening to the women and girls there is just devastating. Ms. Kaur, what steps are we taking to make sure that vital, life-saving humanitarian assistance is actually going to the people who need it and is not diverted by the Taliban?
Thank you for that question. I wanted to first just build upon this last point that you raised for women and girls, who are a core component of all the work we do as the most vulnerable population in Afghanistan. And I wanted to highlight that we've been able to support girls' access to secondary education by training female teachers, supporting curriculum development, and improving safety and well-being of educators and students. We're being able to help women continue their post-secondary education through scholarships for both in-person and distance learning at institutions like AUAF. And during the most recent AUAF application season, we got more than 10,000 applicants. It broke the server. So it shows you that the demand is there and we're being able to harness and galvanize it. We're also supporting apprenticeship and on-the-job training for women in the carpet and jewelry sectors, and providing technical support and learning opportunities for women entrepreneurs. So making sure that we can still create a resilient population there. As I had said earlier, we are very keen on making sure diversion does not happen. It is a threat to our programs, and we recognize that. And so we have third-party monitoring systems. We've got robust risk systems that are in place. We do everything possible and have trainings for our implementing partners to be aware, to assess, to always continuously assess programs. When you see anything that is a potential diversion, they will self-suspend because they recognize the danger that's there. And
Thank
they're working
you.
with their
I'm going to
communities.
interrupt you because my time has expired, but I appreciate your answers and all the work that you're doing in this important area, and I yield back.
And thank you very much, sometime Ranking Member Kathy Manning. We now proceed to Congresswoman Amata Radhawagan of American Samoa.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Chairwoman, and ranking members for holding this important hearing. Let's go back to the Maldives for a minute. There's no change in the budget request dedicated to Maldives for FY 2025. What is your plan to ramp up bilateral cooperation with the Maldives as the PRC increases its cooperation with the Maldives in security and infrastructure?
Thank you very much for the question. I do think the investments we're making in small island nations throughout the Indo-Pacific is tremendously important. The Maldives is tiny, a tiny population of less than 1 million people. They have the geographic waters, though, territorial waters, the size of France. It's enormous. And who controls those waters controls much of the Indian Ocean. So we want the Maldivian people to control their waters, not the Chinese, not us, not anyone else. They should have sovereignty over their territory. We are, in fact, requesting a almost 5% increase in the money in 2025 for the Indo-Pacific. Some of that money, including increase, would go to the Maldives. We are looking at how to spend money from the Indo-Pacific supplemental that was passed recently by the Congress to go to the Maldives. But the most important thing we can do is have diplomats on the ground engaging every day with the government. We have an ambassador, we have a USAID team, we have State Department officials, we have local Maldivians who work for our embassy. That's all through the generosity of this Congress, and we appreciate it.
A third of the Maldives' debt is attributed to Chinese loans. A third of the Maldives' GDP comes from tourism, in which China is the top contributor. What's the administration doing to help Maldives decrease its dependency on China? I think you've answered that partially already.
They want Americans to come and spend your money in the Maldives. I have been there a couple of times. It's worth the visit. It's an extraordinary place. But you're right to say the Chinese are the #1 provider of tourism this year. Last year was the Indians. Before, you had a lot of Russians going there. Maldives is an attractive destination for global tourism, and who goes there depends on who can have the money to pay for the tickets to go. And honestly, I would love to see more people from Europe, the United States, and the whole rest of the world find this part of the world, because the more we pay attention to places like the Maldives, the more they will appreciate they should take the best from our culture as well as from the Chinese and everywhere else, so that we can compete on an even playing field.
So what is the threat to U.S. interests of increasing Chinese presence in the Maldives' security apparatus and critical infrastructure?
I would mention a couple of things. We are watching very closely what the Chinese are doing in Sri Lanka, and I would argue that the Sri Lankans have effectively kept the Chinese at bay in terms of their military interests, right? There's no military basing for the Chinese in Sri Lanka. And that's because through the Paris Club and other partners, we have effectively helped the Sri Lankans to restructure their loans to China and the rest of the world without the Chinese being able to use it as leverage to get all sorts of things they want. The Maldives hasn't even begun that process yet. They will need support from all of us, from USAID, technical advisors, from Development Finance Corporation competing for contracts, from the Japanese and from the Australians, all of us working together so that the Maldivians have options. If we let the Chinese build everything, provide every loan, there's no question that in a few years that'll just be a Chinese colony. It's up to us to be there to compete so that we level the playing field.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, beloved member of American Samoa, Amata Radawaga. Now we proceed to Congressman Andy Kim.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you to the two of you for coming on out. I think I just want to kind of pick up where it was left off, because I'd love to get your thoughts, both of you. Just help me understand, what are the objectives and priorities of the Chinese government in the region? We talked about the Maldives. Secretary Liu, you just talked about Sri Lanka. I thought that was a really important insight. But can you help me understand, where are they prioritizing? Where are we seeing their growing footprint? What are some of their objectives for us to be able to understand at a deeper, more nuanced level?
I know this is an oversimplification, but I would argue the Chinese plan is to have a military base in every country, and every infrastructure project is made with high-interest Chinese loans and low-paid Chinese workers. We just see this model all throughout the region. I mentioned my time in the Kyrgyz Republic. What I didn't mention is when there was a revolution in 2020, the tradition in the Kyrgyz Republic is that the day after a revolution, we've had 3 of them there, the police, they don't fire on their own people, they just sort of melt away. And there's a little lawlessness that happens actually for a few days. This time in 2020, what did people do? They didn't attack American investments or European investments or Turkish investments. They attacked Chinese business. They went after gold mines, copper mines, textile mills. They put 40 Chinese workers of the 25,000 that are in Kyrgyzstan in the hospital by stoning them. They physically conducted violence against Chinese investment. Why? People are pissed. They're pissed that the Chinese bring in their own workers. They don't actually train local workers to do their enterprises. They extract minerals, literally take gold and copper from the ground and just ship it back for processing in China. They don't spend any money in local communities. This is going to have a boomerang effect for Chinese businesses and their interests. We talked about Pakistan and the investments there, $26 billion. They put a huge amount of money in Pakistan. I actually don't see them putting a dime in there right now because they're really worried about whether they're going to get their money back there, right? Their really terrible investment strategy is biting them in the ass. We have an opportunity to do a better job to make sure countries know there are options and they don't have to be beholden to one.
I understand that you're saying, look, this is an ambition of theirs to be able to do this everywhere, but are there particular countries, particular parts of the region that you think we need to be taking some extra steps right now to show that there are options and that there are choices there?
We just talked about small island nations. I don't cover East Asia, but my colleagues who do that say this is a real battleground for influence right now. I would add to that our discussion about Sri Lanka and the Maldives, who controls those islands in terms of influence, controls the waters around them. And so we need to be conscious that those countries should be able to control their own sovereignty. They should make their own decisions. They shouldn't have military basing of the PRC in their countries. They shouldn't allow PRC submarines to operate with impunity in their waters. All of that is critical. And so you can see there's a lot of work by this administration on small island nations right now.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to just shift gears, if you don't mind. A lot of us had paid some attention to Bangladesh recently, and Secretary Blinken back in May released a statement announcing a visa sanction policy leading up to the election, and he noted, I'll just read you the quote here, that they were intended to deter, quote, the use of violence to prevent people from exercising their right to freedoms of association and peaceful assembly, and that was referring to it by any political party. So I guess I just wanted to get some clarification, ask you, are persons who sanction violence against peaceful protests putting themselves at risk of being designated under Section 7031C? I just want to get a sense of where that stands.
Yes, sir. This is actually a new use of this part of the law to not sanction people after they've done terrible things, but to warn people in Bangladesh in this circumstance that if you were to commit violence, electoral violence, you would be unable, or your family members, to enter the United States or to manipulate the elections. The Secretary of State did actually apply these sanctions in September on a number of individuals from the opposition, from government, and in the police forces. And we believe that these elections were less violent than the last two in Bangladesh, in part due to both government and opposition taking a step back because of the threat of sanctions.
Okay, thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Congressman Andy Kim. And we now proceed to Dr. Jim Baird, Congressman of Indiana.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank our witnesses for being here today. I serve on the Ag Committee, and we're currently doing a farm bill that's done every 5 years. But a part of that farm bill is the soft diplomacy, so to speak, where we provide the commodities, or farmers and ranchers provide, the USDA provides the commodities for USAID. And so my question then deals with that audit that in May of 24, where SIGAR found that State Department and USAID have failed to comply with their own internal policies on implementing partner reporting requirements regarding payments made to the Taliban. Furthermore, SIGAR found that state and USAID do not require robust reporting on taxes paid to the Taliban beyond customs and VAT payments. So my question is, does the administration feel the state and USAID have sufficient reporting requirements in place regarding payments made by implementing partners to the Taliban?
Yes, sir. Thank you. If you allow me, maybe I would say two words and then turn over to my much smarter colleague, Anjali Kaur.
That'd be great. That's a double barrel.
Sir, we really respect the work that SIGAR has done. In addition to that, State Department, USAID, Office of the Inspector General, and the Congress more generally. These are important oversight functions. We take it seriously. We are committed to cooperation with these investigations. SIGAR found $11 million they believe to have gone to the Taliban out of a total of $8.3 billion for all international humanitarian assistance. So that's not specific to U.S. government money. That's all of us. Okay, we're about 25% of the pie, so we're not a small percentage, but it wasn't that the U.S. government provided this money. And as I mentioned before, what they found was these implementers were reporting that they were paying utility fees that did end up with Taliban rule because they run the utilities. They were paying licensing fees to local administration that happened to be Taliban. They were doing things that looked like taxation to most of us, which is bad. We don't like when our assistance is taxed anywhere in the world. We keep track of that. We typically deduct that money the next year from the assistance that we provide to those countries. We are looking very closely at the work that CGAR has provided for us. It's a real service that they do for all of us to keep track of this, and we are looking at the procedures that we have in place. Anjali?
Great, thanks. I just want to, agree with the Assistant Secretary on not only how seriously we take this report, but we also issued a Hill note to ensure this was on your radar. And we have since briefed the Hill multiple times on the report and its recommendations. So we agree that we should help ensure that responsible officials include foreign tax reporting requirements in applicable award agreements and collect required foreign tax reports from implementing partners. We believe in the importance of further strengthening oversight and will continue to assess the feasibility of incorporating additional reporting requirements into awards, and we also believe that it's critical, when applicable, to maintain records in accordance with OFAC requirements. And so, independent of the CIGAR report, we've considered broader reporting requirements specifically for its acquisition and assistance awards. And we have been proactively working to issue a request for information in the Federal Register to solicit public input on incorporating increased data collection into our awards. And if approved, this change would increase data collection to provide more granular information on, for instance, taxes and fees, and we'd welcome your guidance on ideas as we move this process forward.
Thank you. The other thing that bothers me a little bit about from the commodities, originally I think the commodities were supposed to be shipped on American ships and be American products. But we have moved to doing it in an in-kind kind of purchase or even to cash. And so we've only got 35 seconds, and I know you can't answer that real quick, but I'm just concerned that we are efficiently, and you just mentioned that, efficiently using those funds to do what we need to do. So
we fully support using American ships and American products, and let us get you a written response on what that means in the Afghanistan context.
Excellent. I appreciate that. I yield back.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jim Barrett of Indiana. We now proceed to Congressman Gabe Amo of South Carolina Heritage from Rhode Island.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If only I were so lucky. Thank you, Assistant Secretary Lew. Good to see you again. Ms. Cower, thank you for being here. Thank you for your service. Just last week, we marked the 4th anniversary of the passing of legendary Congressman John Lewis. While we continue to celebrate his ongoing legacy, a key program to highlight is the Gandhi King Scholarly Exchange Initiative Act, which was signed into law in December 2020. Named for 2 civil rights icons, this initiative creates a partnership between the United States and India to address global development challenges like climate change, education, and economic empowerment for women. Ms. Cower, I was pleased to see that last month you signed a statement of intent with the government of India to formally establish the Gandhi King Development Foundation by this October. Can you share a little bit about what this agreement means for the actual implementation of the Gandhi King Development Foundation, and how Congress and the folks on my side of the ledger can continue to ensure that the implementation stays on track?
Thank you. That's a great question. We were really excited about signing this agreement last month and having Ranking Member Meeks there to witness it, especially given all of his support. So what this has enabled us to do is actually now have meetings that exist on a bi-weekly basis. We've got a working group that's established between the Ministry of External Affairs and our teams here at USAID, along with the Indian Embassy here, where we work on finalizing the governance structure, where we work on finalizing the approach in terms of contractual ways. How do we work with FCRA in India? So a number of these ways in terms of both governance operationally to set this institution foundation up, which would then allow us post-October to actually start working directly with the private sector, thinking about those innovative ways to be able to address key development challenges. That's the gist of the Gandhi King Development Foundation, is really to bring in the private sector to address development. And you know how robust the private sector is in India. So together with the US, we think it would be a great partnership. And thank you for your support. We believe that we're on the right track. Things seem to be moving forward quite quickly. We've already had our first meeting last week, and so as we continue to progress on this, we can provide updates as leading up to October and how we plan on finalizing and marking the occasion of its establishment.
Well, thank you. I look forward to being as supportive as possible, and your citation of the private sector is a good segue to my next question. In September 2023, President Biden was the first U.S. president to hold a meeting with all 5 Central Asian heads of state during the C5+1 presidential summit, a really important event. And together, they announced the New York Declaration, an agreement to strengthen U.S. partnership with Central Asian nations through security cooperation, democratic governance, and increasing economic resilience. As part of this plan, the State Department supported the B5+1 Forum in March 2024 to support connections to global markets through private investment in Central Asia. The forum was an essential first step, bringing together over 400 business associations from Central Asia and the United States together. But we know that more can and should be done to improve our economic ties to Central Asia and continue the work of the New York Declaration. Assistant Secretary Liu, could you share a bit of how the U.S. is working with the U.S. Or our country and our government is working with the private sector here to expand our economic ties with Central Asia, and what are some opportunities and challenges to streamline and strengthen those ties?
Thank you, Representative Amo. In fact, American companies have some pretty robust ties. They tend to be in the oil and gas sector. So we're the number 2 biggest investor in Kazakhstan, for example, but almost all of that is ExxonMobil, right? It is a huge investment in energy, and we are leading in terms of technology and safe operation of our investments in Central Asia. We are seeing some innovative new things happening now in other parts of Central Asia. We have what will hopefully be up to a $10 billion investment in Uzbekistan to build natural gas importation mechanism to gasify cities there. So they are able to provide heat and electricity with some of the natural resources native to Central Asia. We're seeing in other places interest in U.S. investment for importation of equipment, right? Caterpillar has long had a presence in the region because these are big agricultural areas, John Deere. But I will admit that there isn't the awareness of some American manufacturing that we would like. And so some of the things that we have done in the past is do trade missions for trade and franchising, right? You can go anywhere in the world and find a Starbucks or a McDonald's except in Kyrgyzstan or Tajikistan or Turkmenistan. I would love it if we bring some of our leading brands to this part of the world. And the Russians and the Chinese, where we don't exist, they have rip-offs of our brands, right? We could be spreading American business much more deeply to Central Asia, and our ambassadors and our teams on the ground are trying every day to do that.
Well, thank you, thank you, Assistant Secretary. And as we export these brands, we export American identity. And so I hope that we're able to stay focused on that mission as well. I yield back.
Thank you very much, Congressman Gabe Amo of Rhode Island. We now proceed to Congressman Brian Mast of Florida.
Thank you, Chairman. I want to begin by piggybacking on a question that my colleague, Mr. Baird, was just speaking to you about, the Special Investigator Report for Afghanistan Reconstruction. Did you just say that of the roughly $11 million that went to the Taliban, most of it didn't come from America? Is that something you just said?
Correct.
I feel like I heard that.
So it is a total amount of humanitarian assistance that CIGAR was looking at.
From
8.3
implementing
billion.
partners, you're saying?
International donors, correct.
The CIGAR report said it came from State Department and from implementing partners, from U.S. aid implementing partners is what the CIGAR report says.
So I believe that part of it came from us because we're a quarter of all implementing agencies, but the actual report was about 8.3 billion, which is the total amount of all donors. 11 million was identified.
So
as
you do consider dollars going through U.S. aid implementing partners, dollars coming from America, correct?
Absolutely, but I would argue it means that probably all 11 million didn't come from the U.S. government. Likely,
Yeah, that's not what
25%.
Seagar said at all. And so you literally just came here, answered to my friend Mr. Baird, something that was not founded in that Seagar report whatsoever. Did you two sit for Seagar for deposition?
I did not.
Did you? So you consider Seagar so important to respond to them, but neither of you sat for deposition. Were you requested to sit
It was
for
not
deposition?
requested.
Not at all. Did you offer any information to them to help them with their reports?
My bureau offered thousands of person hours to support the collection of information.
No, I wanna continue on this. Ma'am, did you say that they will self-suspend if, in fact, there are dollars going to being grifted off of it by somebody else?
If there is any suspicion of diversion, yes, they will.
Did that happen with Afghanistan?
Yes, that did.
It's self-suspended.
We've had organizations self-suspend when they have noticed that they have been asked to bring in specific staff members or they're being managed
Which
in some way.
organizations self-suspended?
We've had, and we can do this in a closed door setting.
I prefer to do it in an open door setting right
But
now.
some of this will cause reprisal, but there's a number of organizations.
That's okay.
that we
It's
have.
the American taxpayer dollar. It should cause reprisal with them. It's their money.
I can provide you that information. I can provide you more details.
You should
afterwards.
provide it right now.
I will get you that information
When?
soon after this hearing.
How soon?
Today.
Today. Okay, good. We'll look forward. That's a fair enough answer. I think the American people want to hear it, but if you're going to give it today, that's it's better than nothing. So, but you're saying the dollars going into Afghanistan, at what point did it self-suspend? How did it reach the number of 10.9 million if it's self-suspended? And to follow on that slightly, have they self-suspended with what's going on in Gaza and the dollars going to Hamas? Has that ever occurred? I know that's not your bureau necessarily.
Cannot speak to that. Yeah.
So, to go back to this, when did it self-suspend?
We are speaking about specific programs when they have noticed points of diversion, potential diversion. Those were moments of self-suspension where they then assess the situation. I cannot go into the amounts specifically in terms of how that affected budgets, but we can get back to you with specifics afterwards.
So going back to the U.S. implementing partners, how many of the implementing partners actually responded to the Seagar report? Because according to Seagar, very few were compliant in actually responding. This number created, 10.9 billion, was just of those that actually responded. Most didn't.
I don't know the exact number.
Have you put a policy in place to say that if somebody didn't respond to Seagar, that they will receive no more dollars?
We have encouraged all partners to respond as requested.
No, but have you put a policy in place that if they did not respond to our Special Investigator General for Afghanistan and Reconstruction, that they will not receive another dollar from you, of the American people's? It's the American people's money. If they don't want to respond to our questioning about how it was spent, did you put a policy in place that said they won't get a penny?
I do not believe so.
Why not?
But we can get back to you on that. I'm not sure about those.
Let's stick with
specifics.
you don't believe so, because I don't believe you have either. Why not?
I don't have a response to that.
Well, let's work through that. Do you think you should?
We will work with our team.
Do you think you should?
We
If
should-
somebody didn't answer to America about getting our money and then spending it and going to terrorists, should you be giving them money? Do you think you should put that program in place that they're not going to get any? It's
We
common sense.
respect the Seagar report, and we have provided as much support and as much information as we can provide, and we will continue to do so.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the time. According to Seagar, it does say that State Department and USAID have failed to comply with their own internal policies on implementing partner reporting requirements regarding payments made to the Taliban. Furthermore, Seagar found that State and USAID did not require robust reporting on taxes paid to the Taliban beyond customs and VAT payments. That's specifically what Seagar said. So I think Seagar is in staunch disagreement with what you're trying to present to us today. I do hope that you decide to not send any more money to people that don't answer to us, because it is the money of the American people.
Thank you very much, Congressman Brian Mast of Florida. We now proceed to Congressman Bill Keating of Massachusetts.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've been concerned for some time looking at some of the undemocratic activity occurring in Bangladesh. It's really come to a head with the recent reports that in particularly college students coming forth with concerns on the civil service law in Bangladesh, the response of the government to those types of protests has been exceedingly violent. There are reports that at least 175 people, mostly young people, have been killed in that process. Can you talk about what's going on in terms of some backsliding in the democratic process in Bangladesh, what concerns you have for some of the more violent activity, some of the journalists disappearing, some people disappearing, and with their relatives and friends and family cannot even find what happened to them. But in particular, what the State Department, what we can do with our own U.S. partnership with Bangladesh in terms of next steps. If we can do something to reiterate our support for many of the Bangladesh people that are just trying to engage in protest with some of these activities, and any endangerment to the rule of law in that country.
Thank you, Representative Keating. We have been following very closely this past week the violence in Bangladesh. We've condemned that violence. We've called on the government to respect freedom of assembly and freedom of speech. We've called upon the government to restore internet to the country, which has been off now for several days. You will be aware that there is a curfew that has been put in place by the government as a response to some of the violence that's happened. Some in police have said there's a shoot-on-sight order for anyone involved in
That's
violence.
what I heard.
And so we have condemned from the spokesperson of the State Department the shoot-on-sight order and asked them to roll that back. It's a very tense moment in Bangladesh between protesters and the government. We hope that that calm is restored. I have been in touch with senior leaders in Bangladesh. We remain in touch with them now to try to encourage them to find a peaceful way to resolve this crisis.
We had put some sanctions on earlier in the year. Will any of those sanctions be useful in trying to curb this kind of activity?
Well, again, those sanctions were specific to election violence and election manipulation. So there are sanctions, of course, that Congress has given authority to the administration to use in case of gross abuses of human rights. Perhaps some of those would be helpful.
In terms of some of the people that have gone missing, the reports of so many people, particularly in the political opposition and journalists and other people that have been speaking out, do you have any comments on that kind of activity that's gone on? There's just literally, I think the numbers in the several hundred people.
Correct. I think just in the last few days, we have seen press reporting about the arrest of hundreds of people in the opposition and perhaps with student protesters as well.
In terms of Russia-Chinese influence in Bangladesh in that area, have you seen any things that are concerning in that regard as well?
So I would say the most influential country in Bangladesh is actually not Russia or China, it's India. And we have a really active dialogue with India about our policies in Bangladesh and throughout the wider region. We are concerned about the possibility of growing Chinese presence in Bangladesh, but I would say the Bangladeshis have been pretty careful about not overextending.
Okay, quickly changing gears if there's time to answer, but there's another concern too with Central Asian countries and the influence they have supporting Russia in their illegal war with Ukraine.
Well, what we know is that many countries, witting or unwitting, have been transit points for American or other G7 technology to Russia that Russia has used in its production of weapons that they use on the battlefield in Ukraine. We are trying very hard to prevent that. And we have had delegations travel to at least 3 of the 5 Central Asian countries, the ones that have primarily been the target of this diversion activity, to get cooperation. I'm actually pleased to say all of them have been received at a high level. In many cases, those diversion activities have been stopped. It's whack-a-mole. Wherever we stop it, it pops up again somewhere else. So departments of commerce, Treasury and State have been working on this intensively for the past 2.5 years.
Well, the chairman and myself are on the subcommittee in Europe, and we're looking very closely at that issue and working on a bipartisan basis and cooperating in that regard. I would just conclude asking you to monitor closely and see what we can do to stop that kind of violence in Bangladesh. And I yield back.
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much, Congressman Keating. And I want to thank the witnesses for your valuable testimony and the members for their questions. This has really been terrific to have Chairwoman Young Kim here as we work together, and even bipartisan with, of course, Dean Phillips, our ranking, and even good work by Bill Keating from Massachusetts. And so, gee whiz, I've never seen somebody run so fast. Anyway.
We came back for the compliment.
Well, here. But the bottom line is, the members of the subcommittee may have additional questions for witnesses. We want to ask that you respond to those in writing. Additionally, I want to thank the staff for, we're all doing multiple meetings. Chairwoman Kim has been to 5 different meetings as we've been proceeding today. And so there's a good reason she has on tennis shoes. Pursuant to the committee rules, all members may have 5 days to submit statements and questions and extraneous materials for the record, subject to the length limitations. Without objection, the committee shall stand adjourned.